Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for coming today. My name is David Smith. I'm the Director of Screen Scotland. We're the kind of national body for film, TV, everything else that goes on in Scotland, education, skills development, all of that good stuff. We're here to talk about film specifically, not television, specifically film, and how we supercharge the UK's indie films sector to achieve the success that we all seek. So globally, kids and family TV is experiencing massive challenges, and indie producers are looking at film as an alternative, to which I have to say, really? But anyway, we'll get there. This session looks at independent film, both animation and live action, in the children's and family sector, and asks basic questions. Where are we? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? So leading the conversation, we have Yves Gabbro, is an award-winning film distributor and producer, currently director of distribution at Vue Lumiere, Vue's new arm for independent and international cinema, and a strong presence in children's and family content. Yves previously founded Modern Films. At the far end, we have Ben Keane, an independent analyst and board advisor in the technology, media, and telecommunications sector. And Ben's going to... I've experienced Ben's PowerPoints before. You will be wowed. Ben played a key role in building Screen Digest and currently advises several organisations, including the British Screen Forum. Next to Ben, we have Anna Mancy. Anna's Director of Video Games and Certification at the BFI and advises on cultural tests, co-production treaties, and audiovisual expenditure credits across film, TV, and video game. And finally, next to me, we have Andrew Baker. Andrew is a film producer and I think colleague of most of the front row. Film producer and executive, best known as the founder and CEO of Cantilever Media and Kazoo Films. Cantilever specialises in family-oriented live-action and animated films, including the award-winning The Amazing Morris. In 2024, Andrew launched Kazoo Films, a UK-based distributor dedicated to independent animated features for children and families. I think that's all correct. Anyone disagree with that? Reminded of my best man speech at my wedding where I'd ended up going, is that me? To start off with, Ben's going to set the scene. And then our panelists will do a brief introduction for themselves, and then we'll have some questions, and then we'll open up to everybody else for questions. So I think we start with you, Ben.
Thank you very much. So, what's the status? My job is to try and set the scene for you without producing you all to gibbering wrecks of depression, okay? So, the spend, all the money going into film and TV in this country, according to what's recorded by the BFI in terms of everything going for a tax break in this country, it's fallen over 20% since 2022. So raising everything that had been gained in the post-COVID period. Now, a tiny fraction of that gets spent on domestic film production. So let's call domestic as opposed to inward investment, which is big Hollywood studio, streamer-based productions. So you can see the dramatic decline of the domestic business in terms of the investment going into it. The money going into the TV side of the business has also fallen, and the TV guys, and I'm sure many of you here, are getting pretty concerned about how that has been falling, but it's still 3 times more than gets spent on the film side. So, that puts it into perspective. The inward investment side, those big studio, streamer-based productions in film, they have been down. The overall spend down over £1 billion since the peak in 2017. And that is a big, big deal as far as the money pouring into the studios and facilities and all the people who make the big budget films in this country. But you can see the simply dramatic order of magnitude difference between what goes into them and what goes into the domestic, or indeed those made under official co-productions. So I can't emphasize enough that these are just 2 totally different kinds of businesses. The money that goes into an average budget on a domestic production is about 2 million quid, as compared to over 35 for an average for those backed by a big foreign group, a big international group, mainly US. So 17 times higher. So the number of British films that are made without any kind of foreign money in them, so i.e. domestic films, has been dwindling quite dramatically now. On the latest numbers, which could be revised, the BFI is revising numbers all the time, but it's under 100 now. So we're reaching a pretty low number. If we look at how many compared to those that have foreign money in them, you can see that actually, even though those big budget movies are much higher, the numbers are now pretty level. So that is the state of play as far as domestic versus inward investment. Now, if we look now at the family and animation sector specifically, and this is the number of films which the BFI categorized under those groups. Since 2014, only 45 domestic films have been made aimed at that family or animation audience. And this, in 2024, is not a mistake. A big, fat 0. So I draw your attention to the percentage scale here. The percent of all domestic films which are aimed at that audience, tiny percentage. And of course, 0% last year. Now, producers here love to make horror films. 8 times more horror films have been produced than made for kids. That is where producers at least perceive the commercial market to be. And that's despite, some of the opportunity facts that are out there. If you look at the US box office, which is a great marker in terms of the opportunity size out there, the animated part of the US box office took 26% last year, $2.6 billion. Obviously, almost all of that's going to big major Hollywood studios, Disney, Universal, big animated films, but it does signify the scale of opportunity that people love those kinds of movies. And if you compare it to the horror film share, only 6%. So 26% versus 6%. It's an interesting point of comparison, given that perception as to why so many horror films are made. Now, we don't perform very well in the scale of international comparison at producing kids' films. You can see Germany and France way out ahead in terms of the numbers. The UK down this end, a little bit better than Italy and a tiny bit better than Finland. The key commercial group that has really invested in the sector here is a French group, Studio Canal. They've been the most important commercial backer here, backing, obviously, Aardman, backing Heyday. We're going to have a fascinating talk later about the Paddington story. But they have generated, in the 5 films domestically classified in the UK, those 5 films have generated 670 million at the box office. Again, indicating the scale of the opportunity for these kind of films. which perhaps is not being more widely perceived. In this domestic film sector in the UK, a critical role is played by the public service broadcasters, and BBC and Channel 4 in particular. They're the kind of cornerstone of the ecosystem, particularly in terms of the development spend that they put into the industry. That's generating the new scripts, the new ideas. It's a modest amount of money that they invest, but it's critical to how the industry moves forward. But they don't have an interest, or very little interest, in this sector, the family kids sector. So the BBC and Sky have backed 2 films each since the tax break was introduced. Film for a big fat zero. None. So the BBC has not actually invested in a family or animation project for almost 10 years. These are the 2 that they did put money into. Sky's last project, which we're going to hear, I think, a bit more about, was shot in 2021. It has a few more films coming through that we're going to hear from Andrew, but they have now also turned off the tap. So the broadcasters are lacking here. So initial concluding thoughts. So despite the tweaks to the tax regime that we've seen here that have made it more advantageous to invest in the production sector, it continues to have massive challenges. BBC, Film 4, Sky are critical foundation investors in this whole sector, but they've shown little interest in this part of the market, in this genre, despite, as I've tried to point out, in at least some way, there is an opportunity there that is perhaps being missed. Other genres, notably horror, are perceived by producers to have more market appeal. And the only commercial group that has really continued to show continued commitment to this genre is Studio Canal, which, as a result, has reaped the rewards. So, initial thoughts for discussion. David.
Thanks, Ben. Clear market opportunity and clear market failure both at the same time, which is interesting. Can I just ask you a brief question before we go into introductions? What is it that Studio Canal sees in the UK that our domestic broadcasters clearly aren't seeing right now?
Talent.
Yeah.
Great creative ideas and talent.
Yeah.
They're backing it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to that. So we're now each going to do brief introductions. Anna, you're going to go first, then Eve, then Andrew. So Anna, do you want to kick off briefly?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So as David said, I'm Director of Video Games and Certification at the BFI. So for the last 20 years I've been through 3 different tax regimes, starting with sale and leaseback. And then we went into tax relief, film tax relief in 2007, and then we introduced tax incentives for animation television in 2013, children's television in 2015, high-end TV in 2013, and then video games. And at the time we were introducing, I mean, I appreciate animation TV and kids TV is very much television focused, but at that time there was working groups with PACT for children's and animation. We've now moved into another regime with the AVEC, and as Ben alluded to, we also have a higher rate incentive for independent film. So that's where we are. That's what our department does. But we also have other funds in terms of the Global Screen Fund, which supports film, television, animation through co-production funding, distribution funding, and then is an International Business Development Fund as well. And that money, you may have seen last week that in the sector plan announcement, that the Global Screen Fund has successfully managed to double the funding. So going forward, I'd hope that there are opportunities if people came together and worked together to actually address the really bleak figures that Ben's just presented. because I just, I knew, I said we didn't see your slides before we started, but I knew it was Swallows and Amazons was the only one I could remember that the BFI, the lottery funding side of it, funded, and Ethel and Ernest. I'm interested though. I'd be interested. How many people have actually made a domestic independent film? 1, 2. Have you got your hand up, Andrew? And how many would like to if you had the opportunity? See. So I think there needs to be something, obviously this will be something we talk about, but I think that there needs to be coming together to discuss, and it has to be UK-wide, the nations, the regions, the funders, including Film 4, BBC Films. Why aren't you funding domestic children's films? There's an opportunity now. There's a higher rate of incentive for lower budget film. 53%, I mean, it nets out to 30% overall once it's capped at 80%. But there is a real opportunity, actually. And that can help in terms of doing co-pro, because if it's not a UK writer-director, but because the story originates in Canada, for example, that doesn't mean that you can't do it. You can share the work.
I think in live action that the independent film tax credit is really useful.
Yeah.
Animation is probably a bigger stretch given the kind of cost and time involved, but in independent film it certainly makes sense. And I think what you said there in terms of influencing policy, one of the things, obviously my primary constituency is filmmakers, program makers in Scotland, and one of the things we try to impress upon them is that policy is not the climate, it's not the weather, it's not something, it's not an act of God. People make policy, and you have to try and reach the people that make that policy and influence their decision making. And absolutely. I think that's probably the main theme of this whole conference. Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of you will have seen last week the announcement about the select committee on children's content, and it is aimed at TV, but that doesn't mean you can't mention film in responses. And I would look that whenever anything like this through the AVEC consultation, Brexit, BFI gathers together what we call our Screen Sector Task Force, and then we sometimes do smaller groups for smaller sectors. So high-end TV, there's a lot of people come together at the moment because they're looking at the issues for lower budget television programmes. This is an opportunity for all those parties to come together and say, these are the things that are actually, it's not just children's TV. I mean, I think just present those stats and say, there's nothing going into domestic film, and there is, how many people in here? 100 people that at least put their hand up to say they will make a film?
Okay, pause
Sorry,
there briefly.
I'm going on a soapbox.
Just conscious of time. Eve.
Okay, so I'm going to speak more from an audience perspective for films that are made. As David said, my background is in independent production, distribution, and digital exhibition. In the children's and family space, I've released films from the Oscar-nominated My Life as a Courgette about 10 years ago, all the way to last year, Kent's Case Kingdom, which you may know is based on a Michael Morpurgo book written by Frank Cottrell Boyce, who was the Children's Laureate and gave the keynote yesterday, starring Cillian Murphy, Sally Hawkins, Ken Watanabe. One of the producers is here, live proof. We released it theatrically. It's available across all rights and will be on BBC very soon. I have to say it was quite a project to get BBC to license it, but it is there, and it felt like it's such a sort of emblem of British culture and crossover from film or from story to film to the creative industries. Now I run a distribution division of View Cinemas, which is a new idea to bring together sort of audiences, distribution, and within View and their space with kids and family, but also going beyond View with the brand and with our access to audiences. So I'm just going to show a few slides, and I just want to say this isn't a sales pitch for View at all. It really is to just show our commitment to audiences, to content, and to films, and to my interest in children's content in particular. So if that works, you can see that View has a very strong marketing and outreach around children and family. They have sections, or we have sections called Family Blockbusters, which are the studio films within a multiplex. But then there is also a section of Big Shorts and Mighty Mondays. And Big Shorts is really aimed at preschoolers, and it's new content. It's about 60 minutes or less. It's very low environment, or high light, low sound, interaction encouraged, low ticket price. Babies are free. So just this idea of going to the cinema, have a good time for a young child. And then Mighty Mornings is repeat encore programming. It's a little bit cheaper because of that, and it's slightly older audience. But View has been championing independent films for family and kids, in addition to obviously playing all the main films that you saw in the last slide at the bottom. I just took, that they do champion this. And since 2017, there's been an initiative called Big Screen, which I talked about, that has seen an additional 1 million admissions over that time that is just from the curated strand. So it's different from mainstream programming. And the top 3 over those years has been Bluey, #1, then Paw Patrol and Hey Dougie. And with Bluey, there was an idea that we could license it directly from the BBC and make a compilation of episodes. So the first one is Bluey at the Cinema Family Trip Collection, which went on to play at over 500 cinemas and gross 1.2 million at the box office. And then in May, we released another Bluey, which again has gone on to play at over 500 cinemas. On Friday, we're showing a new CBBS original content musical called The Great Ice Cream Hunt. That's opening on over 300 cinemas, and then we will work with BBC again on their Christmas panto in the cinema. So really it's all about diversifying the brand, the BBC brand, these IPs anyway, to show that you can watch them in different places and different identities. And then that comes to View, Lumiere, Slate, which we have those 4 that are there, plus we've acquired an animated film called Little Emily that played recently at the Annecy Film Festival, where it won the Audience Award. And then the last thing I was going to say before I kind of hand it over is that Bluey we're also taking across Europe starting this summer, so it will open in Spain, France, Germany, Poland, Italy, and should I say Scandinavia? Anyway, it's 7 territories over the next few months. So I just to show our dedication, and there is Bluey going to Spain. So Bluey can speak Spanish. And then that's the last thing, and I know I'm wrapping up, David, I promise, because it was just to show that to get these kind of independent films out, you really need to be creative in the marketing, and I think that's what we do, is just to speak directly. So for Little Emily, this is the French release, it was based on a book. They did all sorts of initiatives that we will follow within View, and then across the country where we will try to be in 500 plus cinemas and build audiences for children and family content.
Thanks, Eve. So clear evidence of a market, again, clear evidence that there are people going to see these films, that it's not just Pixar, it's not just Disney.
And we can trailer with them, so that's hopefully then people are going to see these films.
Yeah.
You know, and Studio Ghibli has obviously shown there is that middle ground as well, that you can build audiences for independent animation.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you very much. So Cantilever was the producer for The Amazing Maurice, which was the first Sky kind of CG family animation for quite a number of years. They were a great partner for us. They were kind of the first part of the financing on board for the film. And I'm going to just show just a very quick clip, just because it felt very appropriate.
This rat is clearly a magical rat. I bet he's not the only one. Born that way, or something happened to him, or them, and now they're quite intelligent, despite the tap dancing. And the cat is friends with you, so why would rats and a cat be friends? There must be some kind of an arrangement. No, don't tell me.
I shouldn't think anyone ever has to tell you anything.
It's something to do with plagues of rats, right? All those towns we've heard about. You got together with Keith here, and you go from town to town pretending to be a plague of rats. And Keith pretends to be a Pied Piper, and they all follow him out, and you make loads of cash, right? It's all a big swindle.
Very good.
So, the film business, it's all a big swindle. Unfortunately, you don't make loads of cash. So The Amazing Maurice was our first animated feature film, and for me it was very much a trial. We weren't sure whether it would work, what the international response would be. We were very lucky that we had all the elements come together at the right time. We had a great cast, great script, the animation was great. We managed to get Sky on board. We made it during COVID, which was interesting. And it actually did incredibly well for us internationally. We've won some awards for the film, including a British Animation Award. And bizarrely, there was a chart that came out last year which showed that we were the second highest grossing European film of the previous year. The first grossing being Miraculous. And so it feels great in that you go, wonderful, that was a great success. But then you have to start from ground zero and try and do it again and make some more films. So the good news for us has been that we've got a great relationship with Sky, and they've supported films that we've been developing. And so we currently have one film in production with Sky as a partner called Bollywoof. Amazing Morris 2 that has just started production. We have a co-production which is with Canada and Spain as a kind of service partner. And we have another production that is a Australian-UK co-production that we're just trying to get the financing together on. And then we have a show with Locksmith Animation, which Sky was also a partner. And so from a film perspective, we've got lots of things on the slate. We've got things going into production, things in financing, things in development. And so Sky has been amazing for us as a partner. They've been brilliant. And it absolutely tore the heart out of our business, the fact that they were stopping making feature films or feature animation and family. And so our kind of our big focus has been very much, well, how do we replace Sky in a financing plan? Where do you get the money from? And so that's very much a work in progress. We've got various things that we're doing to try and do that. But what remains really clear and which is really positive is that internationally, animated feature films are still really popular. So when we go to market with our films to say, will you please buy our movie? Internationally, there is a market. They pay really good money. And yes, the market changes all the time. And there is an issue across Europe, which is that the paid TV window has very much shrunk in most territories across Europe. In Germany in particular, it's been a real impact on our financing plans. But there is still a demand in the cinemas for family animation that is independent, that is not big studio feature films. The challenge is, how do we manage to make the UK part of that ecosystem? Yeah. Because the Germans are merrily making films, and the French and the Spanish and the Italians. And our problem is that without having additional financial support from within the ecosystem, and I don't mean, we want the BFI to just give us loads of money, but actually just the whole ecosystem, whether it's theatrical, whether it's broadcast, all of that kind of economic activity allows distributors to actually invest in your film and get a return, and then make more films and invest more. And at the moment, there seems to be a real problem with that ecosystem. It's not working at the moment. And the reason we launched Kazoo Films, which is a film distribution business, is quite honestly, we couldn't get distribution for our own movies. We had co-productions, people were bringing to us where we needed a distributor to help close the financing, and not a single UK distributor was willing to take an animation that wasn't already finished that they could watch. Obviously, Eve has since come on the scene, but very much the goal for us was to say, well, this is crazy. How are we going to co-produce with Europe if we can't raise any money apart from the tax credit? And the tax credit is amazing, and all the Europeans are like, oh, wow, it's a great tax credit, Andrew, we want to work with you. But I can't raise the rest of the money.
So that's a very clear outline for all of you as to where we are, which is pretty stark. I think that zero number for 2024 is genuinely staggering. Up there really with the fact that Paddington is French. But, the zero number for 2024 is...
It's British according to me.
I know, yeah. You passed the cultural test.
Yeah.
So we know where we are, but why are we here is the next question, the logical question to ask. What changed over the years? Have we always been in this situation? Clearly not, because there has been a record of making these films, but something has changed at some point. What's your thoughts on what that was?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, one of the big changes that has affected both production and distribution is the fact that we are not part of Creative Europe. Beyond anything else, there are key specific pieces of support that Creative Europe has for distributors that allow them to invest in films that the UK has no replacement for post-Brexit. Even down to things like if I want to borrow money from a bank to cash flow my tax credits and my pre-sales, if you're within Europe, the bank has an insurance scheme for European films, which means you don't need a bond.
Right.
As a UK producer, they won't cash flow that money to me, and it's a much cheaper rate than I can get from Coots.
Sure.
Because we're not European anymore, so we need to pay for a bond, which means I need to find another £200,000 for my budget to pay for a bond to allow me to just borrow the money for tax credits. So it's not just one part of the ecosystem that has changed. There's lots of things have changed, and
I get that, and I think that sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the things I'm thinking when you say all that is that feels like a downstream impact. There's a further upstream impact, which is more to do, arguably, with the broadcasters.
Absolutely.
But we'll come to that in a second. So just your other reactions to that point. Why are we where we are?
I also think there's a problem with that independent cinemas are struggling as well, and there has been so we've just had a select committee on film and high-end TV, and within that there was an ask regarding from the distribution sector for a specific tax credit aimed at production and distribution, and that, although that DCMS have just responded to that, and it was published in the last couple of days, I think, in Screen Daily, while they're not saying it's off the table, but there is actually something out there. And again, if obviously we have this consultation for children's TV, there are opportunities there to say, actually, this does affect us as well, in terms of actually, I mean, I'm not an expert on distribution, that's either area, but it's actually getting people into a cinema. And, you know, through COVID, the Cultural Recovery Fund was supporting independent cinemas as well, so we don't want to lose that either.
Yeah, I mean, the independent cinemas are as important as the mainstream cinemas, but also particularly for the kinds of films we're talking about. Yeah. I think what you said, Andrew, though, is there is a risk averse in distribution for sure, even for bigger companies, to pre-buy, and that world doesn't exist. So there has to be a different way of you being able to take your proof of concept to production, and us to be able to see what it is for distribution, and somewhere in between, you know, the finance, it becomes impossible, and understand that, and it is a very important piece that we're all kind of struggling with, and that's.
I think one of the problems has also been that there's been some structural changes just in the distribution market. So E1, for example, was a great champion of feature films, and for no reason that is down to the UK, that business has closed. Yeah, and that's just because of Peppa Pig being worth so much money, basically.
Hasbro having lots of money to buy it.
Indeed. Yeah. But what it meant is that you lost a player in the market who had actively acquired animation and released it and supported it with P&A. And without them in the market, they're almost as a catch-22, which is there's no animation in the cinema, therefore animation won't perform. Because it's not in the cinema. Yeah. But actually, what the studios have shown is that actually animation performs incredibly well. When you look at the top films released in the UK in terms of box office, in that top 10, there are so many animated feature films. It's a genre that people want to go and watch. Yeah. But if no one's releasing it at the independent level, then no one's catching on and going, actually, we should be doing this. The audience will come in.
So and that brings us back to Ben, sorry, in terms of your data.
There's a perfect storm of multiple market factors going on. There's the fact that, you know, for all your efforts, the cinema has not recovered post-COVID yet. So there's a big hole in that revenue stream. The TV window has been squeezed, the conventional TV window. The streaming market is, you know, is where it's at, but that is typically a market where streamers want to take global rights. There's a bit of change happening to that, but it makes it very difficult for the rest of the market to survive. So the whole pre-sales model of film financing has been shot to pieces, pretty much. The number of films that get pre-sales has just dwindled and dwindled. And then on top of that, you have the fact that private financing, you know, for films has you know, just gone down and down and down post the shake-up to EIS, the enterprise investment scheme that previously, incentivized private investors to come in. So, there is just all these factors that are affecting the whole sector, plus the fact that there is this perception problem for this particular genre, whereby other genres are perceived to have more commercial appeal. Now, you need to change that perception to create that idea that there is a market opportunity.
Is there also a perception problem around the idea of what is a film? Because obviously, Anna, you work at the BFI, I work at Screen Scotland, along with Film 4, the BBC Film, and our colleagues in Northern Ireland Screen and Creative Wales. We're the primary sources of funding, development funding and production funding for feature films. And I would say I recognise one family film that we funded in this almost 7 years since we've been in existence. And we target independent film, which we see very much as a genre. Independent film is what we're looking to develop. That's the future of filmmaking in the UK. We don't see this as being film.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, yeah. I think we're in that same position, and whether it's intended now also with Andrew's book is whether it's intended for broadcast as well. And sometimes in the lottery funded side of it, if it's intended for broadcast, then that's not in terms of incentive, in terms of like the independent film tax, it has to be intended for theatrical.
Yeah.
And that is part of the problem that goes back to what I was saying before about the cinemas getting a distribution release. It's sort of this perfect storm.
I get that in terms of the financial structure, but our policy, our aim as Screen Scotland, we want the next Aftersun, we want the next Outrun, we want films that will play and potentially be award winners, will make the career of a filmmaker, an independent filmmaker.
Yeah.
We're not looking for, we don't have a mandate to look in this way.
No,
and I think
that points to what Andrew was saying, that Sky and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, but you were saying the same for BBC, same for Film 4.
BBC Film and Film 4 have just flatly said we have no interest in family and animation. It's not what we do. And there's no particular logical reason behind it. It's just, again, a catch-22. No one there has the experience of working in that part of the industry, therefore it's not something they're really interested in, therefore they don't do it. And there's no mandates from the governors, essentially, to say, animation in particular needs to be something that we do. We include it on our list.
that we value and count
there is a value to it.
Yeah.
And interestingly though, if you compare a low budget live action indie feature from a first time director that maybe you've put money into, you compare that with an animated family feature in terms of box office performance, in terms of theatrical release worldwide, in terms of kind of just the long tail of revenue. There is no comparison. We animation wins hands down.
If they're putting money into Bluey, why aren't they putting money into films?
And part of the reason is that Bluey is a brand extension.
Yeah.
It's not a film. It
will be a Disney film.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's very much for them saying this is another way of Bluey reaching a new audience, rather than saying this is a genre in itself. Film animation is something that we should be doing.
Yeah, which is why I put little Amelie at the end there. But when it's interesting on the market, when I go to festivals, there is so much animation in the market. There's so much completed, ready for sale from different countries, different languages that need dubbing or not dubbing, different stories, and they're high production values. They're very good. So there is actually a lot of animation being made and being distributed in different ways. And I would
just not from the UK.
Maybe not from the UK, in the UK, for the UK. Yeah, that is a bit more complicated, and then we do need to dub if we do end up acquiring independent international films in animation particularly. But one positive, I think, in terms of distribution is that we do have different ways of reaching audiences that are a much lower bar. So if you don't have a license, there are other ways to get the content out there, especially through transactional VOD. And also the marketing costs have come down, really. I mean, obviously, if you're a big studio animation film, the budgets are huge, but there is a way to make an impact with a smaller budget that I think historically was more difficult.
And I'm glad you said that, because that is the whole basis of my business model for Kazoo. So in terms of things changing, so Kazoo has acquired some feature films in the market We have our first feature release on the 22nd of August. Write it in your diary, please. Grand Prix of Europe in cinemas near you. And we've actually working with View really closely. And so we've managed to get trailering in front of Formula One.
Very good.
We're going to trailer in front of Smurfs and Bad Guys 2. Our posters are in cinemas now. And we do not have a studio P&A budget. We have a very, very much smaller budget. But it's working with cinemas who have an audience, and it's working with digital marketing that allows us to be able to reach out to an audience and say, look, there's this film in the cinema, come along and watch it, it's great. It's got Gemma Arterton in it and Lenny Henry, it's great. But hopefully, if we can show that by spending a modest P&A, but certainly more than other distributors have been doing historically that are releasing this kind of movie, and the audience actually turns up and watches it, that might affect some change, because it's like someone has to be first for then everyone else to go, oh, hang on a minute, we can do this. If Andrew can do it, anyone can do it. And so it's that thing of going, well, actually, if we can have a couple of successes, it might just make everyone else feel more confident that there is a market there.
Yeah.
Because if we can show it, an audience will turn up and watch a family animation, even if it's not Disney, then suddenly it means we can raise money from the UK, we can co-produce. It just starts to kind of help things move along.
And there are other international, I mean, Flow obviously was a massive success.
Flow is a great example.
Yeah, Flow's a great example. Yeah.
Where it transcended sort of animation, that space. Obviously, it didn't have dialogue, so that was helpful. Yeah. I think in terms of
low dubbing costs.
low dubbing costs. But I was just going to say one thing, and maybe you have a comment on this: is 2D seems to be perceived as some kind of lesser art form of animation.
Or even more arty.
Maybe more too arty to
too
be a film, and so it's cinema. And then I have had broadcasters say, well, we don't acquire 2D, only 3D, and maybe you had that with Maurice. It was 3D, so it was
3D.
very, very sky, and maybe a 2D is less. And I find that really interesting. We have to really work on 2D is okay, it's beautiful, kids love it, they respond to the story more than what the technology is behind it.
Time for questions. So I'm just going to ask one final point. So we've talked about the CMS committee being a moment of opportunity to influence those who decide. That sits alongside the PSM review, Public Service Media Review, which Ofcom are about to launch, I think, imminently. So it may be very imminently from what I'm told. And BBC Charter renewal is on the horizon. BBC Charter gets renewed every 10 years. It runs from, the next one will run from 2027 to 2037. So thinking about it as that will set the weather in many regards for a lot of us. So we can influence that weather in this occasion, just to extend that metaphor even more painfully. But there is a moment in time here where we have an ability to make a change. And it doesn't last for very long. No. It's essentially those 2 years until charter renewal and everything that leads up to that. So what is the role? What should the role of our broadcasters, both commercial and public service, be in that funding of feature films, not just animation, live action as well? Ben, you look like you've got thoughts.
Well, I think they have a public service commitment that they need to address, and that's about reaching the broadest possible audience. I mean, the BBC is absolutely obsessed with a younger demographic as far as iPlayer is concerned. So reaching a streaming audience via the younger demographic, yet clearly they are missing out on a part of the market here in addressing their public service obligations, and Channel 4 is ignoring it entirely. So, there's at least a case to be made here. I would, if I was trying to influence things, one of the things I would do is talk to people like Andrew and make a business case here to stack up actually how the numbers can work. Right? And you will have some pretty good numbers to show that case, but we need to make the case that it can work better than horror, for example.
Yeah.
And you would think with live action, horror obviously is easier to make.
Yes.
But
much quicker.
much quicker than animation, certainly. But live action for kids and family shouldn't necessarily be much more harder than horror.
Oh, not at all.
No. And yet we don't see those ideas coming through.
No, we don't. And internationally, it's much harder to or it appears to be much harder to raise financing for pre-sales if it's live action because of dubbing and those kind of issues. But in Germany, they make a slew of live action family movies that do really well. They rarely reach the UK because it's filmed in German, they have to be dubbed into English, and that's a barrier. But they do incredibly well around the world, and there's no reason why our live action feature films couldn't do equally well.
I think and I appreciate the
Yeah.
green lights on your going question, but that's where look at other territories and how they serve as well when you're presenting evidence. And I think I really think everyone has to work together and speak as one voice.
Yeah.
Because that's more effective.
I think it is. We heard in a session I was in earlier. We heard from somebody from within the Westminster Parliament talking about the thousands of responses they need to have, and that's kind of not always helpful. The industrial policy document I think had 10,000 responses.
Yeah.
So there's no human reading that. That's AI analysed and then something spat out at the other end.
Yeah.
So getting together and having cohesive asks,
Yeah.
backed up by business, that's really important. The green light has come on
And
the
then
screen.
can I just say one point on that, though? There is an extension, if people know all of the discussion around the tax credits across feature film production, VFX. There's also a discussion around distribution being supported through a tax credit, which I think is a very interesting initiative put together through the BFI and the Film Distributors Association and Policy Group. Yeah.
And it's also worth mentioning that Animation UK is already campaigning in relation to animated feature films.
And they're sitting in the second row.
Okay. But it is very much, I agree, I think it's about collectively working out what the ask is so that we're not conflicting. We're not saying one thing and another. We need to go in with a very, very clear agenda.
I think that's important. Yeah.
And one more thing, sorry.
One more last thing.
One more thing. Obviously, we used to have the Young Audience Content Fund, and although that was predominantly TV, maybe then one, ask for it back, and two, insist that part of it goes to film.
I agree. Yeah. And if we can't get the broadcasters, if charter renewal doesn't deliver public purpose around this area, then perhaps the PSM review points to alternative outcomes beyond our current PSBs. Okay, so I think there are two mics that are going to roam around the room. One over there.
Kate's already got her hand up.
Kate, do you want to kick us off?
Thank you. Hi, Kate O'Connor, Animation UK. I just wanted to, that's been a fantastic session just to paint the picture of the perfect storm. And you're absolutely right to highlight the opportunity, the one opportunity we've got, well, more than one opportunity we've got over this autumn to make these points through the select committee. And I think it's a fantastic point and we're going to definitely support the FDA's proposal for the P&A tax relief. But to use your analogy about changing the weather, David, we can do that now. We can do that now. The public sector bodies who do have some funding for production and development can change their policy by just recognising, I'm going to say animation, but I mean kids, much more in a detailed and an embracing way, from the concept of what's a film to how it could be funded to, ensuring that we are actually able to access the funds that haven't been written in such a way that they preclude animation from a development and a production point of view. You can do that now. We're really asking you at Creative Scotland and the BFI to do that now, as well as the change in perception, Ben, as well as the bigger politics, as well as getting the broadcast.
I think it's a very fair challenge, and I think we would recognise it. We are about to launch in the next early next week, a new film talent pipeline in Scotland that's going to double the number of short films made. There is no opportunity for animation in that pipeline because we can't afford to do it. Is what it boils down to. So I need the sector's backing to go to my government, the Scottish government, and say this is a gap, this is an opportunity. We should be doing this. I'm on board, but it's about how we make that case together.
Okay, let's make the case together.
Yeah. Okay.
No. Okay.
Oh, sorry, just at the back, and then I'll come down to the front here.
Hi, I'm Helen Blakeman. I'm a screenwriter and executive producer. Some of you know me in the room. Kate, Andrew, you know me. I was a former chair of the Children's BAFTA Committee, and I'm also founder of Title Page Films. I wrote my first animated feature just as COVID began, and that was for Zealand Animation in Paris, an adaptation of a Sir Michael Morpurgo novel set on the Isles of Scilly. So it's been funded by French money. It's been made with a French team, with a British IP and British screenwriter set, you know, in the southwest of England. Mm-hmm. Everybody on the panel today has kind of, in parts, made my heart sing. I mean, when Eve, I saw that Little Amelie would, you know, hopefully be seen in cinemas here, that was a joy. Andrew, I think what Kazoo is doing is magnificent. Anna, your team has been so supportive for 2 films that I've got, animated features that are on my slate, and Ben, that was a shocker. However, there hasn't been any mention right now about development funding, which is the key for not only indie producers, but for creatives. So everybody wants a package. Now, for animation, that's a costly package. If you want a good script, you know, you don't write it on your toilet break. It takes, you know, 6 to 18 months to go through it, to get your best draft. Then you've got to go out and looking for, you know, a good concept artist. You know, everybody needs to be paid fairly, but with SEIS and EIS not being as attractive anymore, where do we start? And Kate knows we've lobbied together along with Ollie Hyatt about the YAC to bring it back, but there has to be more than that. You know, where are the tax credits for R&D?
So there is something in the, Ben, you've probably read this more closely than I have, but the sector plan for creative industries under the industrial policy plan does talk about R&D. It's a bit vague, I have to say, as to whether or not it applies in content production.
I think they have not equalised it.
No.
They bring it back to talk about tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it falls to public funds and broadcasters.
And Anna, you did talk about potentially that children's fund coming back to the BFI, and if it was thought more
Yeah,
as a
that's
development
it, yeah.
fund plus about film, because film
Yeah,
was...
so maybe it's not just having YAC fund for film, but also the development. But I mean, you must have development funding as
We
well.
do, yeah.
We have development funding in the film lottery funding side, but that again speaks to those lottery funded and the BBC Four, Film 4 and BBC Films. You know, they do have developments like.
Yeah, we'll go up to 50,000 for
it's making those
development
arguments,
funds.
saying actually, why isn't a percentage of this assigned for live action and kids?
Yeah,
you could talk about Bollywood, because it started as live action more than 10
Yeah.
years ago,
Yeah,
didn't it?
so Jason, who created the idea and has been developing it, has had, you know, successive rounds of financing for the film. But after 10 plus years of being able to get it away, it was actually Sky who said, why don't you make this as an animated film? And they brought it to me, and we got it financed, and we're in production. And so
with India.
With India. But it's like Jason needed that money to get it to the stage where he could pitch it, and then Sky came in with development financing, and actually we did another round of development with Sky, which made it from a live action into an animation package. Very much, Helen was saying, you need all those bits together to go to market to try and raise your pre-sale financing.
I don't know about the BFI, but we will come in early for that first stage of development funding that will get you to that conversation with Sky.
Yeah.
And then we won't go much further than the 50k. But we'll only go there if there's clear evidence of market interest.
Yes.
The red light's come on again, so I'm going to ask for one more last question, and then we're going to go. Sorry, there you go. Yeah.
Hello, Alison Warner from Blue Zoo. I think that was gobsmacking, what you said, Ben. I think we're all aware of the state of the, you know, family and films in the UK, but just to see those figures, I think is such an eye-opener, particularly when you see just how much money can be made from animated features. And I feel like, you know, we've sort of hit rock bottom, and hopefully, you know, if we can all work together, that we can start rising up a little bit. But I think, Andrew, you know, when you're saying, you know, obviously you made Amazing Maurice 1, you've got number 2 coming down the way, you've got Bollywood, you've got, you know, you are sitting probably as the lone survivor of animated feature films right now. But what I want to know, what my question is, was Amazing Maurice profitable? does it make you go on?
No.
Right.
And the reason was that we made two things. One is we made a conscious choice that we would invest most of our production fee into the budget because we didn't have enough money to greenlight it. Okay. So we went, the only way we're going to greenlight this, we have this strange thing called COVID happening. We don't know what's going on. If we don't greenlight this now, this is not going to happen. So we said, right, we just want to make this film. We want to make it work. And the second part of it was that the sales commissions were quite high. And so when the money was coming in from the sales, so much was going to sales commissions. And then, quite honestly, it goes to equity recoupment. So as a producer, you're quite far down the waterfall. So we made some money on it, yes. Is it anything like a comparison to the box office? No, absolutely not. But the next films we do, it'll be very different. We'll make sure that actually, you know, we have better deals for the sales agent. So that one in particular, with the sales agent was on board before I had joined. So we were paying 25% sales commission. Now that makes a big difference when you start recouping and trying to get everything through. So, and also we released the film, and although the box office was great, it was during COVID. And so a lot of territories didn't release it in the cinemas, or they did, it was limited because the box office wasn't there. And, you know, money's still coming through. I live in hope. There is a long tail for film, and, you know, it's only been 4 years. People keep saying to me, "Oh, it takes at least 7 years before you see the money, Andrew." So, so we are hoping.
How do you survive till then?
Well,
yeah,
we have to make other
question.
stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's not a get rich quick. It really isn't.
No, but I'm sorry, just to say, I think as a case study, you know, I think it would be great to start using it. To see how we can revitalise everything.
So we have a hard stop. I've been told quite clearly. I have to read a small statement at the end, which is about the next session. But before we do that, Ken, who produced this session, is going to do a kind of up-sum provocation call to arms.
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I was thinking to myself beforehand, does anybody actually bother with film, and would they come? The reason for this was just really to try and understand where are we and where should we be going, and is there an opportunity? And clearly there is, right? And there's a lot of really, really talented people in this room right now who want to make films. And so I think that it's the question, how can the question be asked, is it film? You know, because it's animated, or, you know, it's just bonkers. In Germany, 50% of the international revenue comes through animated feature films. So 5% of their production budget is animated, and 50% of their revenue is from animated films. So the call to arms here to everyone, and tell your friends, is to actually, with the CMF and with Animation UK and with every other organisation that we can pull together, let's actually sit down, have some discussions around the table about what are the steps that we need to take, how do we influence policy, and how do we create a change? Because hell, we can do better than zero, right? So the only way, literally, from here is up. So, you know, if we set ourselves an ambition of 10 films in a year, wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. That sounds like a good point to end on, because we do have a hard stop. So remember, all sessions and timetable information is available on the CMC app, which is sponsored by S4C. Anything you've missed will be available in the delegates area of the CMC website as catch-up after the conference. Videos will be released through the summer. If you've booked Commissioner Speed meetings for today, they are taking place over at the Workstation from 5 p.m. And are sponsored by A Productions. And coming up next here in Cinema 2 is Cracking the IP Code, How Small Studios Can Build Big Brands at 5 p.m. Thank you all for coming along. Thank you for being here and speaking so well.